Well, Michael Cohen is just not rich enough. That's one of his problems. President Trump's former personal attorney, Michael Cohen, said that he had to take out a home equity loan to pay Stormy Daniels $130,000 to never tell her story about having sex with Donald Trump, a story that she then told. If Michael Cohen had to take out a home equity loan to pay $130,000 to Stormy Daniels, Michael Cohen cannot possibly afford the team of 15 lawyers who have been representing him in federal court in Manhattan, who cost well over $130,000 a week. Some of Michael Cohen's lawyers bill significantly more than $1,000 an hour, and they are not lawyers whose law firms are comfortable with promises to pay. They are law firms that generally demand immediate payment. And so, on a financial basis alone, it should come as no surprise today that Michael Cohen no longer has those lawyers. ABC News' George Stephanopoulos reported today that Michael Cohen has dropped the law firm that has been defending him in federal court. The ABC News report also said, quote, Cohen now, with no legal representation, is likely to cooperate with federal prosecutors in New York, sources said. This development, which is believed to be imminent, will likely hit the White House, family members, staffers, and counsels hard. NBC News has verified that Michael Cohen is parting ways with his legal team. The New York Times attributes the move to, quote, the payment of legal bills to his lawyers and their relative lack of experience with the federal prosecutor's office in New York. The New York Times cites two unnamed sources who say that Michael Cohen has not yet been approached by the prosecutors seeking his cooperation, but those sources expect that, quote, the pressure on Mr. Cohen to cooperate may well intensify. The Manhattan U.S. Attorney's Office is investigating Michael Cohen for possible bank fraud, campaign finance violations, and other possible crimes. The Washington Post is reporting big worries in Trump world tonight. Quote, after working for a decade as Trump's personal attorney, Cohen has extensive knowledge of the president's personal dealings and the Trump family business. The president's allies are worried that prosecutors in Manhattan are attempting to build a criminal case against Cohen to push him to cooperate with the special counsel probe, a prospect they see as potentially dire. According to Vanity Fair's Emily Jane Fox, who has direct communication with Michael Cohen, including today, Michael Cohen has felt isolated by President Trump and his inner circle in Washington, who have distanced themselves from him. Earlier this year, he heard that Eric Trump was telling associates that he felt Cohen was sloppy in the way he handled the Daniels agreement, which rankled Cohen. I feel like Don Quixote, he has said to people close to him. It's ruining my children's lives. It's ruining my wife's life. It's worse than a pit in your stomach. Well, okay. Don Quixote didn't have any children or a wife, and he was never raided by the FBI, so maybe he meant Don Corleone or some other fictional Don. The Washington Post is also reporting that Michael Cohen, quote, is feeling neglected by the president, his longtime patron, for whom he has long professed his loyalty. Here's what former Trump advisor Sam Nunberg said about Michael Cohen earlier this year on MSNBC.
I worry about Michael. I'm not going to say Michael's going to lie. I worry about Michael. Michael Cohen got screwed out. Got screwed the most I've ever saw by anyone, by Donald Trump.
Special Prosecutor Robert Mueller referred his findings about Michael Cohen to the U.S. Attorney in the Southern District of New York, where the Cohen case is now being heard by a federal judge who is considering what evidence might be protected by attorney-client privilege among all the evidence that was seized by the FBI in raids of Michael Cohen's home, office, and hotel room. But the Washington Post is reporting tonight that having referred that evidence to the U.S. Attorney's Office in New York, Special Prosecutor Robert Mueller is not finished with Michael Cohen, whose name apparently has resurfaced in testimony by a former member of the Ukrainian parliament. According to the Washington Post, Andrei V. Artemenko, a former member of the Ukrainian parliament, said in an interview that many of the questions he faced during several hours of testimony Friday were focused on his interactions with Cohen. Artemenko met with Cohen in January 2017 to discuss a back-channel peace initiative for Ukraine. I realized that Michael Cohen is a target of special interest to Mueller, Artemenko told the Washington Post this week, days after he was questioned. Leading off our discussion now are Joyce Vance, former federal prosecutor. She's a professor at the University of Alabama Law School and an MSNBC contributor. And Ryan Goodman, a law professor at NYU and co-editor-in-chief of the online forum justsecurity.org. And Joyce Vance, I want to get your reaction to these developments with Michael Cohen.
It's very interesting, but I think it's also in many ways very unclear what the exact situation is with Cohen. And so what we'll have to watch for, the most important thing, Lawrence, will be if there comes a time when Cohen actually sits down with federal prosecutors. Because it's not a situation where you suddenly wave a magic wand and someone's cooperating. It's really a very involved dance where details will have to be worked out. Cohen will have to understand that the cooperation he would provide would have to be full and complete. And so we're many steps removed from being able to say that he will be assisting the Mueller prosecution.
And Ryan Goodman, we have one report just to indicate the kind of expenses here. The special master who was appointed by the judge to examine the evidence in the case and decide what might be protected by attorney-client privilege. The special master cost, according to one report, $47,000 in the first week alone. That's 1 week of the special master who's been on this for weeks. That cost was supposed to be split between the prosecutors and Michael Cohen's side. And that's just one expense. Michael Cohen's own attorneys could easily be billing hundreds of thousands a week.
That's right. That could break anybody. So even if he could find cheaper attorneys, he's not going to find a cheaper way out of this when we're talking about costs at this level. So that's another indication that there's almost like a perfect storm greeting him, both with the president isolating him and then all of these costs and all of this pressure in which he seems to be legally exposed on so many different fronts. You would think that his time for cooperation is coming.
Yeah, and Joyce, Vanity Fair is reporting that the breakup with the lawyers was spurred by a disagreement over payment and how much the Trump organization was expected to foot on Cohen's behalf, according to two sources with knowledge of the dispute. So the issue there seems to be Michael Cohen expecting the Trump organization to be paying more of the attorney's fees involved in this evidentiary procedure.
This is this unusual situation where Trump actually could foot the bill for some of Cohen's fees because Cohen did work for the Trump organization in the past. And it's perhaps a little bit surprising that they haven't seen the wisdom of paying his fees. You know, prosecutors love former girlfriends as witnesses. It's always the spurned ex-girlfriend who ends up telling a lot of good information to investigators. Here, Cohen seems to be playing that role in many ways. He's been left behind. He seems to have a lot of angst over having been left behind by Trump. And now he may have the opportunity, as his relationship with prosecutors becomes cultivated, to actually share some of his feelings and the information that he has, because in many ways the Trump organization has pushed him away and almost pushed him into cooperation.
But Ryan, one of the parties that's in court is the President of the United States, Donald Trump, represented by other lawyers. And so they have the same or a similar objective to Michael Cohen. And so that's a situation where there's another set of lawyers being paid by Donald Trump in that room, where there's more than one way for Donald Trump to be covering the costs of this.
That's right. So he can at least try to get some of it to happen that way. But I still think that Michael Cohen must feel quite aggrieved that his bills aren't being paid for as well. And you would think that that would be a normal process. So it seems to be another sign that the Trump folks are sending to him that he's on the outs. The
Joe DeGeneva, who the president tried to hire as one of his lawyers in this case and is close to people involved, spoke to Politico about this. And Politico is reporting Joseph DeGeneva, an informer legal advisor to Trump, said in an interview Wednesday that Cohen's legal status remained a mystery to the president and others around him. I don't know what Michael Cohen is doing. I don't think anybody else does, he said. Joyce Vance, what's your interpretation of that?
That's a really unusual statement. Just even the fact that they would feel the need to make it is surprising. Cohen Cohen's status could be one of many things. I mean, this could all be a dance being done for the public, and there could have been a cooperation agreement concluded a long time ago. We don't really know. Joe DeGeneva doesn't know. But what his comments highlight is how interesting and how important this is to the president and perhaps to members of his family. That seems to be their focus right now. I think really everyone is holding their breath, waiting to see where Cohen will land in this entire investigation.
And Ryan, we have indications that Michael Cohen's name keeps coming up with Robert Mueller. And what is it that Mueller and his prosecutors might circle back to Cohen about?
I think there are two big issues. The first is that Cohen might have played a significant role, actually, in the relationship between the Russians and the Trump circle during the campaign. If there was collusion, there's pretty interesting signs of it. The Steele dossier, which has been corroborated in different ways, and as Senator Feinstein recently said, it's never been disproven, actually identifies Cohen as taking a lead role when Manafort stepped off the campaign. And secondly, there was a recent report, a fantastic investigative report in BuzzFeed News, that also said they spoke to two federal agents, FBI agents, who said that Cohen was in frequent contact with people trying to work this Moscow deal that were also either had knowledge of or were playing a role in the Russian interference in the election. That really puts him at the center of what the entire investigation is about. That's important. And then also this other back channel plan with Ukraine has Russia's fingerprints on it, the Washington Post story that you identified. Cohen actually speaks to the Washington Post today and says to them that Russia endorsed it, which is a kind of a self-incriminating move on his part. But here we have it again. That's right in the target set for Robert Mueller.
And Joyce Vance, in your experience as a prosecutor, when you have someone like this, someone like Michael Cohen at this point in an investigation like this, and you see a move of dropping these lawyers, these very expensive lawyers, and it's not clear who he's moving to. I have to say, usually when a defendant or a potential defendant or plaintiff changes lawyers, the replacement lawyers are right there, ready to go. It's usually the announcements made at the same time that we're leaving this law firm and this is the one that's taking over. We don't know who's going to take over here. What does that say to the prosecutors? What are they thinking tonight as they watch these developments with Michael Cohen?
So we've seen this before in this investigation with both General Flynn and then again with Gates. We've seen this flurry of activity surrounding a change in lawyers and then cooperation becoming apparent within the next day or two. Prosecutors will likely want to see this moment if they're in fact interested in having cooperation from Cohen. And it seems to me that there are a lot of reasons that would make Cohen a very attractive prospect for cooperation. All of the reasons that Ryan has just identified and his ability to complete some of the pieces of the story that they're trying to understand. So certainly they'll have some form of outreach to him as soon as the counsel issue settles.
Ryan, what is their first approach? If it's up to the prosecutors to make an approach to Michael Cohen to say, would you like to talk? How do they frame that?
Well, I think they would maybe pass him a page like this one and then just list various laws that he is exposed under and that they have evidence of. And there's a lot. Besides all the mail fraud, bank fraud, there's potentially a FARA violation, the Federal Agents Registration Act. Mm-hmm. So just like they got Manafort and Gates and Flynn, there's also an indication that he was operating as an agent of foreign powers with this Ukrainian deal. Mm-hmm. There's just so many instances of this, and there's so many ways in which he's exposed. I think they can show him that. He can just think about the penalties, the minimum penalties for all of this, and I think a rational person with a good lawyer or without one would start cooperating.
Joyce Vance and Ryan Goodman, thank you both for joining us tonight. Really appreciate it. When we come back, Michael Avenatti is here with his reaction to Michael Cohen's lawyers' problems. We'll see if Michael Avenatti thinks Michael Cohen is Don Quixote. And Republican Senator Bob Corker says that his party is now behaving like a Trump cult. Also, NBC's Jacob Soboroff was allowed into one of the facilities at the border that incarcerates children who have been taken away from their parents. He was allowed to see what Senator Jeff Merkley was not allowed to see. Jacob Soboroff and Senator Merkley will both join us later in this hour. Michael Michael Cohen is changing lawyers, and Rupert Murdoch is trying to get President Trump to change lawyers or to at least get rid of Rudy Giuliani. Rupert Murdoch obviously sees Rudy Giuliani as not helping to protect Rupert Murdoch's investment in the White House. And so Rupert Murdoch's New York Post today ran a 2-page spread about Rudy Giuliani's most recent escapade of marital infidelity as described by Rudy Giuliani's most recent wife. Rupert Murdoch's New York Post included surveillance pictures of Rudy Giuliani's new alleged mistress. But if Rupert Murdoch really wants to protect his investment in the White House, he might have to consider paying for Michael Cohen's new lawyers, because Michael Cohen clearly cannot afford to be paying hundreds of thousands of dollars a week to defend himself in a federal investigation in New York City and continue his civil case against Stormy Daniels to try to enforce the non-disclosure agreement that he wrote that was designed to prevent Stormy Daniels from telling her story about having sex with Donald Trump, the story which she told. But Michael Cohen, of course, forgot to get his client Donald Trump to sign that agreement, and so Stormy Daniels' new lawyer, Michael Avenatti, is fighting Michael Cohen and Donald Trump in court in California. But tonight, Michael Avenatti is here in New York, and Michael Avenatti joins our discussion now. You did a calculation about how much this case is costing Michael Cohen in New York City that you put out today. You estimated it could be $500,000 a week.
Correct.
15 lawyers, some of them getting over $1,500 an hour. Some of them a low would be $700 an hour.
Correct. And under New York rates, I mean, I think you're looking at 15 lawyers at about 50 hours a week, and you do the math, and it's, on average, a hybrid rate of $750 an hour, and that's before you factor in Mr. Ryan, who's probably billing at about $1,200 an hour. I mean, the burn rate, Lawrence, here is significant. It's probably about $500,000 a week. And look, this is no different than many other criminal white-collar prosecutions. You have a defendant that starts off defiant, like Mr. Cohen, who talks about he's willing to take a bullet for his co-conspirator, and all of a sudden the burn rate sets in, and you realize you're burning through your cash, and you're never going to get that money back. That money is going to be gone forever, and you're put on an island by your co-conspirators, which is what has happened to him with this president, with Mr. Trump. They put this guy on an island, which is beyond stupid. Okay, this is a president that demands and values loyalty but provides none. And we've seen that time and time again. And in this case, it's going to ultimately cost him, because they're basically putting this guy on an island, not to mix metaphors, but when the music stops, he's not going to be left with a chair. And this is a very, very dangerous situation for the president. I mean, I said this 9 weeks ago, over 2 months ago. I said that Mr. Cohen was very, very dangerous to this president. I said he was going to be indicted. I said he was going to flip on the president, and that he posed a bigger threat than the Mueller investigation.
Why wouldn't the president be helping him out financially with these legal fees?
Because he's not smart, Lawrence. I mean, why would the president, of all the attorneys in the world, all the attorneys in the United States, why would the president hire a guy like Rudy Giuliani, dazed and confused Rudy, to go out on the airways and spew the nonsense and the sexist comments that he has? I mean, this guy is a walking disaster. I mean, every day he speaks, our case gets better, and people get more and more outraged.
Well, yeah, Rudy hasn't been speaking lately, I think for obvious reasons. Let's listen to Emily Jane Fox in the last hour with Rachel Maddow. As we know, Emily Jane Fox has direct contact with Michael Cohen. She has the best source about Michael Cohen, which is Michael Cohen. Let's listen to what she told Rachel about how Michael Cohen is feeling.
The president has done nothing in order to make Michael Cohen feel like he has Michael Cohen's back, and that has been a problem. You forget that the president went on Fox News and basically said, I barely know the guy. He's like a coffee boy. He did a very, very small percentage of my legal work. Right. And then his attorney, Rudy Giuliani, has gone on television repeatedly making this harder for Michael Cohen. And the reaction from Michael Cohen, from everything I know from my reporting, has been, these guys don't have my back. Now a man who is frustrated, isolated, feeling alone, and feeling very, very angry at the Trump family in general and at the president.
Angry at the Trump family in general and the president, and he has information about the Trump family and the president.
Well, Lawrence, I think what's going to happen is, look, nothing lasts forever, okay? I know a lot of people think that things last forever. They don't last forever. And so what's going to happen here is the narcissism of this president his arrogance, his stupidity is ultimately going to catch up to him because he's not providing air cover for the guy that knows where all the bodies are buried. I've been saying this for a while. I mean, this is the guy that handled all of the nonsense for the president for the better part of 12 years, okay? If there's one guy on the face of the planet that you provide air cover for, that you provide legal fees for, that you bring in the tent, that you make him feel loved and welcomed, it's this guy, okay? But that's not what we've seen. In fact, we've seen just the opposite. And this arrogance and this narcissism is very, very dangerous, okay? This is the guy that knows where the bodies are buried, and I believe that he's going to sing like a canary because he's not going to have any choice but to try to save his family and the people that he cares about, and he's going to be out of money.
Let's listen to this very powerful one-word answer that Emily Jane Fox gave to Rachel's question that laid it all out. Let's listen to this.
If Mr. Cohen, either based on those feelings or any of these other dynamics we've been talking about, if he does decide that he's going to cooperate with prosecutors and tell them everything he knows about his interactions with President Trump over the years, is that a potential serious risk for the president in terms of the president's own legal liability?
Yes.
That's got to be the scariest moment that Donald Trump has had on TV this year.
Well, I mean, Lawrence, again, I've been saying this for 2.5 months. I mean, I predicted this, and people say to me, well, how did you know? How could you have predicted this? How did you know? I mean, this really isn't that difficult if you have some experience in this game and you've seen other cases. This case, even though it involves some rather large, important figures in public life, is no different than many other white-collar prosecutions. But what is astounding to me is that we're talking about the President of the United States who promised the American people he was going to surround himself with the best and the brightest, and this guy has surrounded himself year in and year out with morons, people that are completely incompetent and certainly not up to the task at hand, and it's going to come back and it's going to bite him in a very big way.
Part of Emily Jane Fox reporting today is that today, Michael Cohen was engaged with his California lawyers who are fighting you and Stormy Daniels over that civil case. Why doesn't Michael Cohen just drop that case?
Well, at this point, Lawrence, because we put him in a box, he doesn't have the ability to drop that case. That ship sailed many, many weeks ago, and it was a trap, a tripwire that we laid, and he fell right into it, as he's done time and time again in connection with these cases. I have to tell you, people ask me, Lawrence, over the last 3 to 4 months, what has surprised you the most in connection with what has happened? And the answer is very, very clear, and that is the incompetence of these lawyers, the incompetence of Michael Cohen, and the fact that they keep falling into every trap that we lay. And again, ultimately, this is going to prove to be a very, very big problem for this president.
It sounds, by the way, like Donald Trump has been listening to you, because Maggie Haberman, New York Times, tweeted earlier today and has a story about this tonight saying, Trump has been fuming about Cohen in private, blaming him for the messy Stormy Daniels situation, but he also is fearful of making that public because of chances it further pushes Cohen toward the Southern District of New York. So Donald Trump, according to that, agrees with you about how messy the Stormy Daniels situation is because of Michael Cohen.
Well, Lawrence, here's the bottom line. All the king's horses and all the king's men can't put Humpty Dumpty back together again. And it doesn't matter how concerned he is or how much he fumes or how much he yells and screams in the White House. He is too far down the path. This is not going to end well for this president. I've said it before. I'm going to say it again.
Michael Avenatti, thank you very much for joining us again tonight. I appreciate it. When we come back, Senator Bob Corker says the Republican Party has turned into the cult of Donald Trump. And also, NBC's Jacob Soboroff reports from one of the facilities that is incarcerating immigrant children at the border, the facility that Senator Jeff Merkley was not allowed to see. Senator Merkley and Jacob Soboroff will both join us. A United States senator has a constitutional right to visit and examine federal facilities because of Congress's constitutional authority to oversee the conduct of the executive branch. But when Senator Jeff Merkley went to Brownsville, Texas, to examine a facility used by the federal government to incarcerate immigrant children who've been separated from their parents, this happened.
Hello, yes, can I go in with you, please?
No, sir, you cannot go in with me. Oh. You cannot be here to private property.
And let me introduce myself. I'm Senator Jeff Merkley from Congress, and my team contacted this facility and asked for permission for me to come and see what is going on inside with these children.
Well, we don't have any information on that, so I'm going to have to please ask you to step away, sir.
That facility is a former Walmart that was remodeled to incarcerate immigrant children. Today, Msnbc correspondent Jacob Soboroff was in the first group of reporters allowed inside the facility since Senator Merkley was asked to leave the premises. Jacob Soboroff joins us live from outside that facility in Brownsville, Texas, and Senator Jeff Merkley, Democrat from Oregon, is also with us. Jacob, first of all, to you, tell us what you saw, and can you show us anything that you saw inside there?
Yeah, so Lawrence, I think right around the same time we're coming on the air right now with you, we're getting some of the first handout photos from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, which operates this facility. We were not allowed to bring our cameras inside, and that is because there are almost 1,500 boys between the ages of 10 and 17 years old that are going to sleep in there tonight. At 9 o'clock, the lights go out, and it's essentially a prison or a jail without cages or cells for these young boys. The majority of them who arrived in America as unaccompanied minors, they crossed on their own, but an increasing number, as you know, and have been reporting on, are being separated from their parents because of the zero tolerance policy from the Trump administration. And it's truly an unbelievable thing to see. I mean, it's almost hard to wrap your head around, but you go inside and there are hundreds of kids at a time in line for chow, doing activities, but they're all there because they were picked up by the Border Patrol and locked up, and they're not going to be able to get out of there for the next couple months. At least that's the average stay.
Jacob, have you seen any of the images or video that we're showing right now from the facility?
I did catch a glimpse of them, Lawrence. I mean, one of the most striking ones, I don't know if you have it and can put it up on the screen, is there's a lot of American history all over this place, and the kids go to school for 6 hours a day, and they want to teach these kids about America. But there's a mural of of anybody that they could have possibly picked, Donald Trump, right in that cafeteria. It's the first thing you see when you go in there. And essentially what it says is, if you don't always win the battle, but you can win the war. You could probably read it. I don't have it in front of me right now. It's just a striking thing to think about, that an increasing number of these kids are being ripped apart from their parents and brought into a facility like this, sleeping in a former Walmart because of a Donald Trump policy. And there's Donald Trump up on the wall for them to see every single day.
Jacob, was your access restricted, or were you allowed to look at anything you wanted to?
No, we could. I mean, in terms of restrictions, they asked us not to actually speak with the children, but I was able to kind of, exchange hellos with many of them. And I asked them, how are they doing? Most of them said they're doing okay. And I want to emphasize, this is a licensed facility with, child service professionals. And I think that they're doing, for all intents and purposes, a relatively good job of taking care of these kids. There's a large medical staff on duty at all times, 48 people and 3 doctors on call. There's teachers. It is 1 to 8 in terms of staff to detain children. But the big thing, and I'm interested to hear what the senator has to say about this, that was flagged to me by the operators of this facility, which again was open before this migrant policy change by the Trump administration to zero tolerance, is that now it's going to be overflowing because kids are being ripped away from their parents and they're putting into centers like this. They got to open these 10 cities, and the administration is looking at federal property like military bases or ports of entry. What they told me inside here today is that those facilities don't have to be licensed. They don't have to have practitioners that are professionals in their field, because essentially those are emergency setups. And it wasn't something that I had heard before, and I would imagine could have very big consequences when you've got hundreds, if not thousands, of undocumented children, as young as infants, not being taken care of necessarily by professionals.
Senator Merkley, your reaction to what Jacob's been reporting?
Well, yes, and Jacob, I have a couple questions for you. One is, were you able to determine whether the kids who were taken away from their parents are able to have regular contact with their parents?
What I was told, Senator, is that it's up to basically the penal institution that these parents are placed into. And now that the administration is trying to charge these immigrants to come to the country illegally as criminals, oftentimes that means it's up to a federal prison whether or not they can make phone calls to their children that are inside here. They said that most of the children are able to make contact once they're separated, but at the end of the day, that's something that's scheduled by the prison that parent is ultimately placed into.
Well, I've heard from the folks who work with the refugees that it's extremely difficult for the kids to reach their parents or the parents to reach the kids, and that previously this facility was used as a temporary spot from which kids were placed in smaller, more appropriate homes, foster homes around the country, but that now, because those homes have been flooded, they're filled up, that they're having to really turn this into the place where kids stay for a long period of time. Is that your sense of it?
Yeah, Senator, there are virtually, in fact, it's not that there are no available beds, there are negative bed space when it comes to the allotted capacity for this facility. They had a variance issued in May to allow additional beds inside the facility itself. We walked around in some of these dormitory-style rooms that are supposed to have 4 beds each. They've got 5 beds each inside of it, and they literally cannot handle any more people. And now a big challenge is the administration may be turning over the fingerprints and the biometric data of people, sponsors that want to come and pick up these kids. Maybe it's family members and maybe they're undocumented. Now that that data may be turned over, it was raised inside, that potentially these people may not come to pick up as sponsors these undocumented children that are inside, which has created a whole new set of problems. Where do they go from here if not to a sponsor if people are turning away from coming to pick them up?
And one more question. We've heard that from child specialists that the trauma is enormous for these kids to be separated from their parents. Do you have any sense from the specialists who were there on site that they're seeing this trauma and that they've geared up the appropriate type of counselors to provide assistance?
Yeah, one of the really fascinating things that came up when we were inside, Senator, is that the Office of Refugee Resettlement becomes the guardian of these children. And some of them are actually prescribed medication for psychological issues once they're inside here. And normally that would be the decision of a parent. But because the parents are not with these children, again, some who've arrived on their own, but now an increasing number that are separated from their parents, it's up to a government agency to decide what prescriptions these kids are going to get. And many of them have to rely on that in these types of situations.
Senator Merkley, Jacobs would allow to see one facility. It is the biggest facility, but it's just one facility among many around the country that are being used this way. We have no idea how the girls are being treated in their separate facilities. We have no idea how the children of younger ages, below 10 years old, are being treated. We have no reports on that. What can you do as a senator to get into these places to see how these children are being treated?
Well, the first thing is to really highlight the problem, and I thank you so much for focusing attention on it tonight. I think it's only because of the protests that I staged a week ago that reporters are now being let in. But it needs to be possible for members of Congress to go in with just a day's notice, so we see how they're actually operating, not how they're cleaned up, spruced up, the show put on for us when you have to get reservation a week or two in advance. And we are pushing for a bill, Senator Feinstein's bill, I'm a co-sponsor of it, that will keep the families together. These are families that are fleeing persecution overseas. They're applying for asylum, and we have a new message for them, which is if you are being persecuted and you wash up on the shores of America, we no longer greet you with the Statue of Liberty, with a flame, a torch in her hand. Instead, we greet you with a pair of handcuffs, lock you up and take your kids away. And even though we know this injures the kids, and this is completely amoral, evil, destructive policy, it just has to be ended.
Senator Jeff Merkley, I have no doubt that we would not be getting this report tonight from Jacob Soboroff if you had not gone there first and staged that protest, the only United States Senator to do that. Senator Jeff Merkley and Jacob Soboroff, thank you both very much for joining us on this important issue tonight.
Thanks,
thank you. Coming up, 2 Republican senators now so embarrassed by the cowardice in their party that one of them is calling it a Trump cult. Remember when politicians used to be thought of as power-hungry egomaniacs? Now they are thought of as weak-minded sheep, members of a cult with no room for their own egos in their daily devotions to the cult.
Look, we're in a strange place. I mean, it's almost it's becoming a cultish thing, isn't it? It's not a good place for any party to end up with a cult-like situation as it relates to a a president that happens to be purportedly of the same parties.
That's Republican Senator Bob Corker, who cannot believe that his fellow Republican senators have surrendered their constitutional authority over tariffs to the President of the United States. Most presidents of the United States have not had the authority to raise tariffs or change tariffs in any way. It wasn't until the 20th century that Congress started handing over tiny pieces of tariff authority to the president. At the height of the Cold War with the Soviet Union in 1962, Congress decided to give the president the authority to raise tariffs for national security. National security was everything in those days. It was the most important thing to everyone in Congress, and that near panic over national security, Washington made some very big mistakes over that, like the Vietnam War. And in 1962, Congress never anticipated that we would have a president who would abuse the power to use tariffs for national security. Congress never dreamed that a president would impose tariffs on Canada for national security. And if you had asked me what Congress would do if that ever happened before the Trump presidency, I would have told you that the chairman of the Senate Finance Committee and the House Ways and Means Committee, with jurisdiction over emergency tariffs, would have introduced an emergency bill to remove or limit the president's power to impose those tariffs for national security. And one of the reasons they would have done it is that in the pre-Trump era, committee chairmen had very big egos, and they did not allow anyone to tamper with their jurisdiction, including the President of the United States. But those egos are gone, and Congress's respect for its own constitutional authority is gone, because the committee chairmen are now all Republicans. The committees are all run by Republicans, which Republican Senator Bob Corker now calls a cult-like situation. It may be that Republican Senator Bob Corker is speaking out against this only because he is not running for re-election. Republican Senator Jeff Flake is not running for re-election either.
This institution, the Article I branch of our government, is not an accessory to the executive branch. And we demean ourselves in our proper constitutional role when we act like we work for the president, that we are only here to do his bidding, especially now.
How did it happen? Our next guest, Jason Johnson, is a PhD in political science. We'll see if political science can explain the collapse of the Republican Congress into a cult-like situation.